we turn our attention to an issue that many of us, especially those from Delhi and neighboring cities, are facing every day. This is what we've been grappling with as of late in the national capital and the surrounding areas. We've experienced severe heat waves that have in some cases even become a matter of life or death. And we say that because according to an EY analysis, there's been a 70% increase in heat-related deaths amongst those over the age of 65 and above in the last 2 decades alone.
Absolutely, Pooja, because I'm a Delhiite and I know what has been going on since the last few weeks and have been complaining about it, but when it comes to the last 24 hours alone, can't complain much.
Absolutely.
But extreme heat that can also make it unbearable and in fact downright dangerous to work across the broad range of sectors that are vital for the economy. And to shed more light on the very subject, we also bring across when it comes to the focused discussion this time around, that would be on heat waves endangering India's development. We are currently privileged to be joined by a distinguished panel of domain experts to delve into this critical topic.
Yes, please, if you'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our guest.
Absolutely. Let's welcome on stage with a rousing welcome. Let's keep the applause going for Ms. Sumaira Abdulali, who is the renowned environmentalist who has been actively voicing her concerns about the rising heat waves in the country.
Ma'am, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Kindly please take your seat. Moving on.
All right, Dr. Kalpana Balakrishnan, Dean Research and Director, World Health Organization Collaborating Center, WHOCC, Faculty of Public Health, and also the Sri Ramachandra Institute of Higher Education Research. Dr. Balakrishnan's sparring work is also the one in the arena of air pollution, health and chemical risk assessment that has been setting new benchmarks across India and beyond.
Ma'am, thank you for taking the time to be here. It's an incredible honor and privilege.
Also welcoming Mr. Mozaharul Alam, who is the Regional Climate Change Coordinator, United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, and the Asia Pacific Adaptation Network, APAN, Secretariat.
All right. And I am told that my colleague Dipti Sachdeva of the Times Network will in fact moderate what promises to be an incredibly colorful and engaging panel discussion. Dipti, if you could please do the honors and join us on stage. All right. And as we're waiting on Dipti, perhaps Amita, you could take over and spearhead what promises to be a fascinating back and forth.
Absolutely, because this time around we're going to be talking about heat wave and the heat stroke that has claimed to have taken the lives of multiple people. And this time around itself, it has said that when it comes to the picture, the scenario that has been witnessed not just in India but world over, heat wave has been significantly rising.
All right.
And we've been talking about not just India, but also in the UK as well. Imagine they're saying that heat wave is around 26 degrees. That is spring for us when it comes to Delhi heights.
All right. Okay. So I'm told that Dipti might be slightly delayed. So you already set the context, Amita, for what promises to be a lovely back and forth. So I ask that you please take it over and engage in a power-packed discussion with our esteemed panelists. Huge round of applause once more, ladies and gentlemen. And Amita, with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pooja. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And of course, Sumaira ji, as I talked about heat wave, it's bad, ma'am. How do we understand when it comes to the situation that has been leading to such kind of changes, the climate change, it is a concern and we can see it. Mic to you, right? Yes, ma'am.
Is it on?
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to Delhi, where I was told not to come because of the heat wave. And I don't know how you all survived it, but it was bad even in Mumbai, though not as bad as Delhi. I think that heat waves are part of a larger phenomenon. We called it global warming for a reason, and then changed it to climate change or made it climate change. Because climate change encompasses the larger events which are happening as a result of rising temperatures. The heat wave is one manifestation across the world, as you said, even in London. But climate change includes the sudden kind of rain that we had, which was unseasonal, and all the other events which have been leading up to it. So heat waves are not something to be taken lightly. Everything that we do results in climate change. The trouble with climate change is that ordinary people believe that this is an issue for governments and that they are only the people who are suffering and kind of, in a way, the recipients of the problems, and they are helpless. The real fact is that every action that people take results in what they get, including government action, and it's up to us to make sure that we petition governments and make sure we get the kind of actions that we want. That includes air pollution, it includes noise pollution, it includes every other thing, destruction, landslides, floods, all those things which happen as a result of climate change, yes, but also as a result of local actions on the ground taken by both governments and people. And when we know that these things are happening, we have a disaster management plan in place, a national disaster management plan. Heat is included. Some of these other climate events are included. Cold is included. But the heat and the heat waves are not included in the action which is to be taken. It's only included in the list. So heat is also something which affects people disproportionately depending on their social and economic abilities and strata. And because of this, we need an action plan. We need advisories, health advisories to people, how to tackle increased air pollution, how to tackle heat waves, just as we have when we know there's going to be a flood or a cyclone. And these are actions which are very doable by the government. They should be implemented immediately so that people know at least what they have to do, and the divisions between people being able to access ways of protecting themselves from heat waves and other disasters are not restricted to those who can afford them.
And preemptive steps that you're saying are must and need to be taken.
Preemption and preventative action is the way to go. It's too late when these things are already upon us. We hear about how development is imperative for the people. It is imperative for the people that development takes place in such a way that their lives and health and work is protected too. Most of our country is in the informal sector. They work out in the heat, and they are the ones who are dying. We cannot have development for future generations which does not take into effect the action that we are imposing on them today.
Absolutely, because when it comes to development of a country, of a nation, simultaneously should go hand in hand, Dr. Kalpana, especially when it comes to climate change, because that's what I said. It's so visible that you can actually see. I mean, if you talk about our parents, they used to say, oh, it never used to rain at this point or in, this time of the month. How do you believe that when it comes to air pollution as well, has a direct impact on our human lifestyle?
Well, thank you. Great pleasure and privilege to be here. It's not very often that we as health epidemiologists get to talk about, how difficult it is to explain what we see as epidemiological trends to our clinical practice. Anything that, gets the population sensitized or the clinicians alerted, or for that matter, our entire, machinery to get into action is when we start seeing people dropping dead. And if heat waves and heat stroke deaths are a silent killer, you can imagine how underappreciated air pollution-related deaths are. Fortunately for us, we don't have episodes in which people are dropping dead that are visible, but yet a lot of people are dying, and dying slowly, and dying in large numbers. So heat and air pollution are really the two sides of the same coin as far as climate change is concerned. And one of the things that has to be sort of really appreciated is air pollution is not just chronic respiratory disease, and heat waves is not heat stroke deaths. Both these risk factors impact every population subgroup across the lifespan, from in utero impacts to impacts in the neonatal period, to infant development, to adolescent health, to elderly health, including mental health, neurocognition. There is no boundaries as far as these two risk factors are concerned. And the other thing that is not very widely appreciated, I think, is that, why is this burden that, keeps coming out from the global models or even the national models so difficult to reconcile? You feel like we are not dropping dead every day or seeing people drop dead every day. Why is this number 7 million deaths attributable to air pollution with 2 million just in India alone? Why is hundreds of thousands of deaths attributable with 30% of those deaths attributable to heat waves in India alone? Where are these numbers coming from? Are these models, credible? Are these models, informed enough by India epidemiological investigations? Do we need to, reinvent the wheel and assess every single aspects of these health impacts in our population? It's really because these exposures, normally we think air pollution is an urban problem and a community health problem. And heat is really an occupational worker productivity problem. Nothing can be farther from the truth. It's really, heat is as much of a community problem. Air pollution is as much of a worker problem. And there are numbers to support that, wherein we are looking at 40% of the workforce being exposed to air pollution, and nearly 90% of our community populations in both rural and urban areas being exposed to unhealthy levels of air pollution.
Right, but ma'am, you just piqued my interest when you mentioned about urban and rural. How do we actually signify that? Because this time around, whenever there is air pollution and Delhi being at the center of this, in a few months from now, unfortunately, annually, this is something that we have been witnessing. Indeed. There is obvious blame game that has been happening, but how do you actually define or differentiate between rural and urban areas? It's the same air that everyone is breathing.
Exactly. There is no difference, but yet much of the attention to air quality actions has been devoted to attainment in the largest of metropolitan cities. Whereas air is unhealthy for all populations in rural and urban areas. And therefore, there is an opportunity now for us to recognize that the big numbers, the health burden is really coming from air being unhealthy and heat being unbearable throughout the country. And rural areas, one of the most under-recognized factor is the emissions from the continued use of solid fuels for cooking. We talked about not cutting trees for some, sporadic purposes like, perhaps, having electronic voting machines. But you really look at how many trees are we cutting every day for supplying everyday cooking needs for rural populations. So these are really low-hanging fruits, and fortunately, our National Clean Air Program takes very much cognizance of this very important source of ambient air pollution, not just household air pollution. So every woman who cooks with biomass is not only getting exposed herself, is exposing her family members, but these emissions are going outdoors. And half of Delhi's problems, or probably a third of Delhi's problems, is because of quite a bit of the neighboring states' rural populations having to rely on this traditional source of energy and resulting in bad air quality. So you cannot get Delhi's air right without getting the entire air sheds
So there are
right.
several factors that we need to take into account. But Mr. Alam, as far as the solution is concerned, because now we all have to come across to you and understand. We know the problems. How do we solve them?
Okay. First of all, thanks for the invitation. Before I talk about the solutions, let me just add maybe 2 more points as a part of the problem. We talked about the climate change and increasing the temperature. But one thing that we also need to basically keep in the equation is shifting the monsoon and shifting the summer. It is not only that the temperature is increasing, but also season is also changing. And if we look into this, the changes of the temperature with the changes of the summer, that increases the demand of the electricity or the other power. If we look into this, the heat wave is basically increasing the demand for cooling. And if we look into the increase of the demand for cooling, in the last 4 or 5 years, the increase for the electricity for the cooling demand has increases. And it is around the 4% if we look into the peak load. If we look into the peak load in that context, is the 4% has increased. If we look into the consumption point of view, it is about 21% has increased in terms of the electricity consumption. So we need to look into not only the problem, where the demand also coming, and we talked about the clean, the sources of the electricity. We have heard about the renewable. So we need to look into the solution in a holistic manner. And then what I'd like to mention when we're talking about the solution is the solution, obviously, usually we go for the active cooling. We put the aircon when we have the affordability to purchase the devices. But if we look into the other options available in terms of the passive cooling that we call, and the passive cooling is nothing new. If we look into the different types of right time to make it as a part of the building design and the code. It is a part of the city planning and the land use planning, so that we have the adequate space outside the building so that we have the ventilation. And if we look into the spaces reducing in the cities and urban area, it is reducing a lot, meaning that the space for the passive cooling is also reducing. If we look into the space for the trees, the space for the water bodies, all are shrinking because of the urban growth. So I think this is the right time for us collectively go for the design part of the passive cooling aspect, as well as the creating the space for that we have the higher ventilation and the open space which will provide the passive cooling.
Alam sir, do you believe that should we go back to the ancient times? In those centuries when we are looking at such kind of, heat wave must have been there, but obviously there was no electricity, so there was no air conditioning. Should we go back to the ancient times and adopt that more eco-friendly methods?
If it is the ancient time, but obviously that is probably the approach-wise, but it has to be part of the development. It is not that we are going to back to the ancient time in terms of the way we used to live, but we have the development, we have the technology. So it is not that we need to just go back, but it is more that how we are going to use the technologies, the options available for us, and how to utilize that. So that is important. But let me just add also one thing. Sure. If we look into this, because just my time here in Delhi is the 5th week. And when I came, it was 45 plus the temperature. Okay? Now, I was looking into the literature. Is this the 45 is something new? Answer is no. We have seen the 45 even more than the 45 degree, 48. But the important aspect is sustaining that 45 degree for a longer duration. So that is another critical aspect to look into in the context of climate change. It is not the absolute figure, but how long it is sustaining. And that also need to be part of the planning.
I think in one place where we need to stop making records is when it comes to rising temperatures. Because heat wave, ma'am, again, how do you believe, especially when it comes to, you mentioned the daily wage earners. There are many of them who are still at the receiving end. Do you believe that it is high time that it needs to be recognized as a situation where to be called as a calamity? Because here, again, when there is a heat wave, we often see that there are advisories given that schools be shut. But summer vacation timings have also been affected because of that. Everything gets affected. How do you believe that economically viable situations and solutions can be taken, the impact that it has? Especially, I'm just not talking about children and the elderly, of everyone.
Well, it is a calamity. I mentioned that it already forms a listing in the National Disaster Management Plan, which means that everybody acknowledges that it is a disaster and needs to be treated as such. So my request then would be to the government that now that you have identified it already as a disaster, there's no question of now re-identifying it. We need solutions which they will give us as to what should be done. So as I said, I was told not to come to Delhi. That was option number one. The second option was stay indoors in the air conditioning, as we are doing now. But if neither of these two options had been available to me, as they aren't to many, then I would look to the government again to tell us what are those options, firstly in the form of an advisory, should I stay indoors, and if I need to stay indoors, then where is that indoors going to be? That's a space that should be provided. If I need water to cool down, which is, I believe, one of the recommended actions to take, because heat and drought and water scarcity is linked, where is that water? Again, this is something I cannot decide on my own, because if it was so easily available, I would do it anyway. And other actions like these. So these are things in which we need institutional support. And therefore, it does need to form a part of the disaster management plan, starting with identifying a heat wave, not looking to individual doctors and TV channels to tell us what are the actions we should take, but to be told by the government. If it requires days off from work, from school, how is that going to be handled? There needs to be a mechanism for that. And most importantly, the development again. What kind of development do we want, which will give us an increased heat island effect at a time when we are talking of urbanization being a driving factor in India's development model. If urbanization is a driving model and all our buildings are clad with glass and cement and concrete, and for example in Mumbai where I live, when development takes place, the very first thing that happens is that every single tree on the plot is cut. In fact, even the trees outside the plot are cut. We talk of renewable and afforestation schemes. So right next to my house is a building which is being built. And I complained to the tree authority and they checked up the permissions. They said, madam, they don't have to retain a single tree, not even one on the plot. In fact, they have cut the trees on the road outside the plot. And the development is being advertised as being nestled in an old growth tree area, which is the trees we have planted as residents of the area and are being looked after and are now helpless to prevent. So these are the development models which we need to question. Development, yes, but what type of development, and is it really going to filter down to all who are the most impacted? These are luxury developments, and we need to look at whether air conditioning and luxury and greater use of consumption of power for air conditioning is really inclusive to all and whom it will benefit at the end of the day. We need to remember the words that we speak, which is that development is for the marginalized and poor first. And we need to remember that in the actions and in the implementation of policy. And yes, disaster management is imperative if these things are to be controlled now and not 2030, not in 2070, but today.
Time is now. Time is now for that. But even when it comes to the correlation is concerned, Dr. Kalpana, what do you believe are the benefits of the intervention that we believe that could actually prevent the exposure to heat and air pollution, both, ma'am?
I think we have a very well-formulated National Clean Air Program that will address both the air pollution emissions, the air pollution exposures, as well as, contribute towards, lower climate warming potentials, because these are hardcore emission reductions. And I wanted to sort of, go back to what Mr. Sharma had explained about leapfrogging with, greener technologies to sort of, transform, particular sectors. So what the National Clean Air Program has identified is 8 kinds of sectoral interventions. And while green hydrogen may be the solution for 1 or 2 sectors, and I think we need to be sort of looking at how to increase this intersectoral dialogue so, the renewable powered grid that is available for, increased electricity consumption and, lowered carbonization for the power sector can also be thought of being, transferred to the residential household fuel combustion sector. We think of, the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, for example, was an extraordinary initiative which made the first step for access to cleaner energy for these rural populations, relying on biomass. But we need to not just, increase access, we need to increase use. And clearly, there are challenges in making LPG, freely available to everybody all the time, while that would be the most ideal solution, at least for the poorer population. And I want to sort of really allude to this equity consideration. So what transformations in the energy technology sector would make sure health, climate, equity, development, time poverty, productivity, and the ENY report said, unless we are going to look at transforming this into the GDP trajectories, we are not going to, get enough attention. So we have the data. I think the biggest way of, increasing the benefits transfer is to look at all the data that is available on all these dimensions across the sectoral interventions that are being proposed. And as it gets rolled out, we need to supply this analysis from this data, from these indicators, back to the government and the other stakeholders, and that's the only way we can really make sure that we make the gains in the near term.
So you're saying it should come from the top and should be streamlined in a manner that benefits everyone.
Right.
Mr. Alam sir, when we talk about the resilience building is also concerned, especially when it comes to the heat wave and the exposure that is concerned. How do we prevent such that and build more resilience?
Okay. In terms of the building resilience, as we have already seen how the temperature is going to increase, the first step is to reduce the greenhouse gases so that we have lesser problem. I think that is the first step that we need to talk about, and we need to put our actions together so that we have the scope to reduce the temperature rise. Now, coming to the resilience building, particularly in the context of the heat wave and the resilience, the India is called the India Cooling Action Program. And as a part of the program, the government has already identified the type of the actions, including the passive cooling that I was talking about, so that we can address or reduce the demand for the cooling that we use for the active. What is necessary is at the state and the city level to integrate the cooling action plan as a part of that development. So it has to be integral part of the cities as a part of their plan, so that what they're going to build in future will incorporate the passive cooling idea as a part of the development. So that is going to be one. Obviously, if we look into the resilience beyond the heat wave, obviously the equity aspect that we have heard about, other health dimension that we also talked about, the livelihood aspect of the people, all need to be part of that. So that is where the National Adaptation Plan that we have heard from the Honorable Minister, as well as the NDCs, the implementation of that plan is also important, in addition to integrating the building code, the cooling action plan at the state level. Just let me mention one thing, that what UNEP is trying to do here in the two states in Maharashtra and Tamil Nadu, helping the state government to come up with their state level action plan to promote the passive cooling at the city level. Thank you.
So it all comes down to action, and right on time. Thank you very much, because this time we have been talking about how heat waves have been affecting when it comes to India's development, and that has been an insightful conversation that we have had. Thank you very much for joining us here on stage. It's been an honor. It's been a privilege.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause once more. And I ask that all of our panelists please remain on stage, because we'd like to take the opportunity, Amita, to have you present each of our panelists with a special certificate. And this certificate is indicative of the trees that are planted specifically in their name. Each of the certificates, of course, also has a QR code, and once you scan the QR code, it immediately allows you to track the real-time status and the geolocation of the trees that we've planted together, the Times Network and Sankalp Taru Foundation, as a part of the brilliant initiative, because we believe even a small step can make a monumental difference. Wonderful. Be generous with your applause, ladies and gentlemen. Keep it coming. These are our climate crusaders. All right, and I want to take the opportunity to re-acknowledge all of our partners in this effort, the India Climate Summit and the inaugural India Climate Summit. They have together made a gathering of this caliber possible. So I could re-acknowledge our associate partner, Adani, our Green State partner, Energy Department, Government of Karnataka. Keep the applause coming, ladies and gentlemen. Our knowledge partner, Ernst & Young, our research partner, Climate Trends, our NGO partner, Sankalp Taru Foundation, and our education partner, of course, Bennett University. Now,